Before we start the show today, just a quick note. Yesterday, we released a very special episode based on a recent investigation by the Indian Express. For this investigation, one reporter spent 5 weeks in a 5th grade maths classroom to observe one teacher as she tried to get students to catch up after the 2-year COVID break. In the episode, we follow that 5-week journey with them and hear the voices of that teacher, her students, and their parents from that very classroom. If you haven't heard it already, we suggest you do. And if you have heard it and liked it, do share it with people you think will like it as well. Now, on with the show. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about 10-minute delivery companies.
Need soap instantly? Need tea instantly? Need chocolates instantly? Use Swiggy Instamart.
Download Zepto. 10-minute grocery delivery.
Blinkit, your favorite 10-minute delivery app. Grocers is now Blinkit.
Now, the thing that lies at the core of quick commerce companies like Blinkit and Zepto is the ability of delivery agents to reach your house with your order in under 10 minutes. 10 minutes to pick up the order from the store, beat the traffic, reach your colony, and come up to your doorstep. One of the reasons they are able to do this, of course, is that these stores or smaller warehouses are located very close to residential colonies. A series of them are usually spread across any given city. But the rest is very much dependent on the delivery agent. Now, earlier, companies like these used to be lenient about when the delivery agent was actually reaching your house. There were no penalties if the agent reached in 15 or even 20 minutes. But now, this has changed with the introduction of some new terms. And these terms are actually leading these delivery agents to work harder and to essentially risk their lives. On the show today, Indian Express's Soumyarendra Barik, who covers the quick delivery industry for the paper, joins us to talk about these new terms and how it is affecting these agents. So Soumyarendra, could you talk about these new terms that companies like Zepto and Blinkit have introduced?
Yeah, so I think a bit of a context would be helpful here to understand where we're coming from. So when this entire boom happened, when this category was being created, first by the likes of Blinkit, then Zepto came in with the promise of 10-minute deliveries, etc. So more or less, and what we were seeing uniformly across these companies was that the payment structure for the delivery workers used to be a flat per order payout structure, that if you deliver one order a day, you're going to make 50 rupees, 60 rupees, 30, 40 rupees, depending on the timing of the day, etc. Flat. There were no incentives to deliver a certain number of orders a day or a week or a month. So those incentives were not there earlier. And one more additional context on top of that is that now there is an increasing shortage of these delivery / gig workers in the market. Because a couple of weeks ago when Zomato announced its earnings for the last quarter, there was something that the company's founder also acknowledged, that there is a big shortage of delivery workers in the market right now. Because as things are opening up, as the economy and the country is opening up, more opportunities are being created. So a lot of these people are migrating to different jobs. But I think one more thing which he more importantly pointed out was that the migrants who sort of left during the first lockdown or the first wave, etc., many of them are yet to return to their jobs. So wherever they left, they've settled there, probably found a source of livelihood there. So, these two things, the market is dealing with a crunch of these delivery workers. And of course, in terms of adoption, we are seeing that many of the stores that these companies operate out of, like, their inventory, where their inventory, etc. is stored, the popularity is definitely increasing. So, the demand on workers proportionately goes up as well. And in a time then, very strategically, these companies have introduced incentive-based payment structures as well. So, to talk of Blinkit and the very clear change that's happened there is that earlier Blinkit used to pay these workers a flat 50 rupee per order. So you deliver 10 orders a day, you make 500 rupees. It was a very simple maths for them. But now, ever since Blinkit has raised quite a lot of money from Zomato and there is a talk of a potential merger going on. So it appears that, the company has taken a leaf out of Zomato's book, because Zomato has these incentive-based payout structure. And what I saw within the Blinkit app was also something very similar.
Yeah, and these are the changes that are now being talked about. Tell us, what similarities did you see here?
So I'd say sometime in May, what Blinkit did was, first of all, it reduced the per order payout to rupees 25. So that was halved directly. Then what they did is that they introduced a new incentive based structure where they said that if you deliver 15 orders a day, you will make an additional 100 rupees on top of whatever you've made. So 15 orders you deliver, 25 rupees per order. But because you've hit that 15 orders milestone, you'll also make an additional 100 rupees. Similar if you deliver 20 orders, if you deliver 30 orders. So what these workers are saying is that a gamification of the system has happened. That, even they know that there are hurdles and like a point till where they can go when that number is thrown up on the screen that, okay, one more delivery and I can make 100 rupees additional. So that race has now begun.
And you mentioned changes in Blinkit, but have companies like Zepto also made these changes?
So Zepto's thing is a little different in terms of incentives and algorithmically. Is that so Zepto had a payout structure, of course, similar to Blinkit, it has a daily per order payout structure, certain numbers, etc. But on a weekly basis, it used to have that in a week, if you delivered 200 or more orders, you would make 10,075 rupees as incentive. But now that has been shifted to 250 orders and for the same amount of money. So basically, even though the money stays same, the work goes up. And what these workers were saying that, even to deliver on the earlier terms, even to deliver 200 orders a week is a task which even though they can manage in a way because if there is an option to do overtime and everything, so they can potentially manage it, but it's definitely got a lot more taxing for them.
And do we know how much this has affected their incomes?
Yeah, so we did calculations and their pay has been reduced anywhere between 15 to 25% depending on the platforms and depending on the time of the day, etc. So even though the work has slightly gone up in a way, the payout has come down.
Okay, so we have the gamification of this entire system where delivery agents are incentivized to do more deliveries and make sure that they happen within 10 minutes. And of course, like you mentioned, the work has gone up, but the pay has come down because of these new terms. So then due to all of this, what are delivery agents being forced to do?
Yeah, so to make up that sort of differential, they will have to put in more hours, they will have to deliver more orders. So now if somehow that worker can optimize that, if instead of 10 minutes, if I somehow take 7 minutes to deliver a particular order, I can potentially do 2 more orders today by doing similar hours in the day. And we've seen this increasing, and the biggest complaint also that has come out of it is that there is a certain level of indulgence in traffic behavior, which actually violates several traffic norms. Very rarely you'll see them wearing helmets. Very rarely you'll see them following a red light, etc. And of course, oftentimes we've seen them, and I'm sure everyone has seen this sight on our roads, going against the traffic's flow, etc. So these are the ways that, they are of course also trying to save their own time in the rush to deliver more orders a day. So I think overall in the big picture is that these terms have changed, more incentive-based payouts have come in, the system has been gamified, and that basically they believe is actually pushing them more because the pay is coming down for equal amount of work or in some cases more amount of work. So the only thing they have is to optimize their own time, for which they claim that, they will have to engage in a rash driving or violating traffic norms. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure in this job for them.
Okay, and apart from them being under pressure and them having to break traffic rules and risk their lives just to get more money, you write that on top of this, delivery agents also have to face abuse from their supervisors if they don't meet deadlines, right?
So now, even though these companies claim that they don't deduct money for late deliveries, etc., one very non-financial yet equally taxing thing that came out during the reporting process is that there's a lot of friction between these workers and the managers who are managing that particular dark store. If they show a record of delivering orders later than 12:13, if they're taking more minutes than that, etc., there have been instances that several workers told me that, the environment that's created there, in terms of how it's communicated to them verbally, abuses have been hurled at them, etc. So it gets very toxic from a mental health perspective as well. So, of course, whereas there is a clear economic downside that's happened, on the side, there's also the social impact that this race to deliver quickly, very tangible psychological impact is also happening on the mental health of these workers. And it's apparently a huge problem. If you have a track record of consistently delivering later than 10 minutes, they either fire you, but of course, there is a shortage right now, and that probably is not a very viable option for many of these dark stores. An environment is created where it just gets extremely toxic for you.
Right, and the other thing is that just riding and delivering orders in this heat must take a lot of toll on these workers, right? Plus the packets that you have to lift, I'm sure, are very heavy. Now, you in the past have spent a lot of time with these delivery agents, so talk about this aspect a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, see, the obvious things we all know, right? I mean, in Delhi, we've seen how hot it's gotten this year and practically around the country where these services exist. And to deliver at noon, at 1 or 2 p.m., at 3 p.m. in the day, when temperatures are on the upwards of 40, 42, 45 degrees, and to deliver consistently under those weather circumstances, I think that in itself is a separate bucket where you're like, okay, this is a very difficult job. The physical toll it can have on you. And again, like we discussed, right, this is a game of speed. So for them to sit back and relax and probably have a glass of water or a bottle of water in the middle of these things is very scarce. So, they always run the risk of something like dehydration, etc. And also, I think one thing that goes unnoticed in all these things is that some of these companies, they do offer insurance claims like accident insurances and everything. But, these subtle things that happen to you over a very long period of time on any given day, they're riding their bikes for more than 150, sometimes 200 kilometers, right? And their job is essentially a 6-day work week for them. And to consistently be on your bike for those many hours every week, every month, over a longer period of time, I think there is a lot of accumulated health implications that these riders are already facing by virtue of their job, which goes unnoticed because it's not an everyday occurrence that someone's complaining about a back pain and everything. But like you mentioned, I've traveled with several of these workers, and this having an acute back pain, etc., not being able to maintain a correct posture, or just having to deal with immense body pain is something that pretty much all of them complain all the time. But again, I mean, it's just something that the job requires. So yeah, apart from the mental toll, the physical toll is immense. I mean, it's of course very, very visible, and a lot of it also goes unnoticed and it is invisible, but it's very much real.
And you mentioned insurance, and I was wondering, do these delivery agents get any sort of employee benefits from these companies?
So the reason that something like a gig economy exists is because of the very nature between the employment status of this company vis-a-vis their workers. So their workers aren't quote unquote employees. Like you and I are employees of a certain company, right? I mean, we enjoy some benefits. Of course, you and I have insurance, but on top of that, we have some paid leaves, we get some PF, etc. So by virtue of not being quote unquote employees of these companies, they miss out on a lot of social security benefits. Like there are no paid leaves, there are no maternity leaves, there would not be any period leaves if you're a woman a delivery worker, a woman gig worker. There perhaps would not be any PF, etc. There has been a lot of furor over providing insurance to these as something as basic as insurance, because these workers are literally out for 10, 11, 12 hours a day on the road, and we've discussed this before, like beating traffic at all costs, a huge part of their job. So I think in a situation like that, and because there was so much furor, all these companies do provide more or less health insurance or a term insurance, etc. So that is there, but again, has happened because of years and years of furor over providing something as basic as a term insurance for people who are literally out there, risking their lives. And it's such an unpredictable thing. We've seen so many people working for these sort of platforms die. Very recently, a person from Zepto, a 19-year-old boy who was working for the platform to make some money on the side, etc., got rammed by a car from the behind and died in Dwarka. So this is a very real risk that this job carries. So yeah, insurance and similar benefits they do get. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't call it a benefit. Insurance and other things they do get. But again, something that an employee would get, like we discussed, like, PF or paid leaves, etc. That, of course, is completely out of the purview for them.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that some sort of health insurance for these agents has been possible is that the media often covers these stories, right?
Yeah, I mean, because we all are aware of the kind of life and the kind of quality of life these people have. So when something inevitably happens to them while performing their job, or when coming back to their houses after having performed their job, it does create an interest from reporters. And that's why it gets covered widely, and of course creates a lot of pressure on these companies as well. And these people stand out in the crowd. Like, someone's wearing a purple shirt, someone's wearing a red, bright orange, a bright yellow shirt. So these people also stand out.
Yeah, and the t-shirts will mention the name of these companies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing which almost everyone who's worked extensively in the sector recognizes, and also it becomes unfortunate joke now, is that when these workers actually sign up for these platforms, wearing these t-shirts or whatever overalls, etc., is of course something that the company forces them to do. But what not many people know is that if I were to sign up for a Zomato, or if I were to sign up for like Swiggy, etc., I have to pay for those clothes myself. The company doesn't give them to me.
Also, it's something that the company wants you to wear, but you'll have to pay for it?
Exactly. If you were to believe or, to listen to the company side, it's seen as some sort of a security, like, you're joining my platform. I'll be giving you an opportunity. I'll be giving you employment. So this is, at least in Zomato's parlance, which I'm very well aware of, it's called as quote unquote starter kit, which I think at least a year ago was something around 2000 rupees, which will give you a t-shirt and that cloth bag that they carry their food in, which is attached to the bikes. So these two things come in that package. So for companies which are valued like in billions and billions of dollars, these workers eventually have to pay for their own work clothing.
Okay, and one thing we have often seen these companies do is nudge users to tip delivery agents. And some apps have also been nudging people to offer water to delivery agents because it's so hot outside, which people should do because it's considerate. But by doing this, are these companies sort of passing on their responsibilities to the customers, in a way, reducing their burden of fairly compensating these workers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. And many academics and researchers, etc., who extensively research on this area, both in India and globally, this has also come out as a bit of an ethical conundrum. Like, how exactly do you classify tips as? And, if it invariably takes away a lot of the financial responsibility that the company should be bearing towards its own workers, and shifts it to the customer to be a little more humble and be a little more modest and be considerate in at least thinking that, okay, this person has a difficult job, so I should pay him, her a little bit more money. But yeah, I do feel that the companies do skip a lot of their responsibility by insisting on tipping, etc. And again, I mean, to nudge people to offer water to these people and everything. I mean, I feel it's a little rich coming from them to know on one hand that this job can be extremely difficult and to still expect them to do crazy hours, crazy distances, etc. in crazy amounts of time, and then to nudge users to offer them water, etc. I feel it's big double standard on the parts of a lot of these platform companies. Also, apart from just some of the financial incentives that are passed on to us as customers of these platforms, I feel one more thing which we don't discuss enough is also the delegation of quote unquote managerial roles to customers. The very idea that I have the ability to rate a worker, that I have no idea who he is, where she's coming from, what kind of a day that person has had, if they're dealing with some ailment within, or if they're just not in the mood to deliver an order within a prescribed amount of time. I have no knowledge about all of these questions, right? But for me to be able to decide in a way, quote unquote, their fate by marking them 1 star and bringing their overall rating down, which then further impacts how many orders, etc., they receive from the company in a day. I feel this delegation of managerial roles to customers who have no context whatsoever of these workers, and their only touch point is the moment that they get something, come back, and then they have to make a decision, etc., or at least they have the power to make a decision that can impact the life of these workers. So yeah, the company is borrowing our services as quote unquote delegated managers as well. So yeah, they are really, really saving a lot of money by doing these sort of activities.
And Soumyarendra, what do these companies have to say about all this? Like when stuff like this gets reported?
It's like if you tell them that you're deducting money from a rider, or if you've brought in a gamified system, of course, these companies are never going to just accept it like, oh yeah, we've done something. So the core points that's common between all of these quick delivery platforms is that first they'll say that these riders aren't showed the promised delivery time. Like, if the app is showing me as a customer 10 minutes or 12 minutes, etc., they aren't aware of it. They don't have visibility into that. And second is that they don't penalize them monetarily. But both the instances we've seen aren't true, because for instance, in Zepto, I found out that there is this concept of a breach and an external breach. So for instance, if your order was supposed to take 10 minutes to deliver, and if a certain worker took longer than that, so say like 5-6 minutes have elapsed since those initial 10 minutes, then that particular time is considered to be a breach. And if the order isn't delivered even after that, then there is something called an external breach. So it is very clear if there are instances where these riders are taking longer than 10 minutes or taking longer than quote unquote the promised time of delivery that's shown to customers, there is some sort of an action or, some sort of a communication that happens from the company's side to the workers that, okay, you breached this order. Oh, okay, there has been an external breach. And of course, like we discussed, the environment that's created, all these things culminate into an environment where they feel pressurized to deliver in 10 minutes. So even though these companies will claim that, they don't pressurize them, I think many factors come together, which end up meaning that these workers are operating under immense pressure.
And have we seen delivery workers protest against such working conditions and how the system works?
We definitely have seen protests. But again, classic, of course, none of these companies will ever come out and say that we do support a union, etc. And like the numbers are healthy. I think Zomato claims in the upwards of 3 lakh delivery workers across the country. Swiggy claims somewhere close to that. Zepto, etc. Of course, not as high because their operations aren't as big yet. But again, it would be safe to assume that they do within like some 50-60,000 workers very easily, minimum. And again, that is probably in all likelihood an understatement. So yeah, we've seen strikes, we've seen multiple protests and everything. But also, Shashank, at any given point in time, probably there won't be a widespread issue in all their workers because not all of them would be dealing with similar things. And again, we've seen complaints time and again that whenever a protest like that has broken out, we've heard of, their IDs, etc. being blocked or they being delisted and never being rehired, etc. because they're just problematic elements for the company who can raise their voices and everything. So we've seen that happen a number of times. And there, of course, has been a consistent and systemic effort to, control these voices as much as possible. It's unfortunate that these voices aren't being controlled by more worker friendly policies, but by tactics, essentially hard-handed tactics like we just discussed.
Okay, so one problem is the gamification of this entire system. But do you think the problem also lies in the very promise that your order will be delivered under 10 minutes?
So I think the gamble was first played in the US. That's where this concept erupted of these extremely quick deliveries, and subsequently by nature it was then later copied in India. Blinkit came out with the idea first, then Zepto followed through and everything. So I think the discussion within the funding community, the investor VC community, is that even though this thing has historically not happened in a market like India or perhaps many markets globally as well, there is this push towards trying to modulate consumer behavior. Like if you show the consumer that you can deliver something in 10 minutes, they have a belief that many people will buy into that argument just because the convenience of speed essentially. But we have seen the unraveling of these 10-minute delivery companies in the US. We've seen widespread protests. We've seen significant correction in valuations, etc. It hasn't played out on a similar level in India yet, although we did see a couple of months ago, Blinkit was faced with a very precarious cash situation. That's when Zomato had to come to the rescue, infuse some money to the company. It had actually shut down several of its dark stores, etc. Zepto similarly had a high-flying start and everything. Everyone expected that within 4-5 months, it'll become a unicorn or a company worth more than $1 billion. But last time they raised $200 million on a valuation of $900 million, which was surprising for many people because they were expecting it to become a unicorn much sooner, let alone not become a unicorn so far. So there has been correction also probably in their promise.
And wait, did that correction happen because of the things we have discussed?
So because of several factors, right? First is that if there is a work environment, the attrition rate is extremely high in these jobs, right? I mean, on an average, a typical worker would work for a platform like this for say 3-4 months. So the attrition rate is extremely high for them. And couple that with this acknowledged fact now that there is a widespread shortage of delivery workers. So we are already seeing that their own self-proclaimed promise of 10-minute deliveries is not happening in many parts of the country today. And many new entrants, for instance, Ola was trying to enter this space with Ola Dash. It still exists in some parts of the country, but it had huge plans to, come into this in a big way, of course, with the deep pockets of Ola and everything. But it had to cancel more than 200 contracts that it signed, with several dark stores across the country because simply it was becoming very difficult for them to deliver on this promise of delivering orders within 10, 12, 15 minutes, etc. So yeah, even though there was an initial push to modulate consumer behavior or change consumer behavior, I don't believe that on a unit level or from a unit level perspective or, from an operational perspective, it has become possible so far because prices are going up. And if the workers are getting paid less, there is no way they will continue in a job like that. They will move on to something which pays them a little bit more. And now that the economy is opening up, probably they have some other opportunities which are more lucrative for them compared to a job like this. And also at the same time, mentally and physically less taxing as well. So I think they're also choosing those avenues now. So yeah, I think overall the promise that was given to consumers was of course fueled by a lot of VC money. But then we saw global correction in many things. The funding simply just stopped coming in. We saw many of them face a difficult cash situation and everything. And in most places, they aren't able to fulfill their 10-minute delivery order. So yeah, the space, even though it was created, I don't think it's operating at the scale that even these companies themselves would have wanted to operate them today.
And you mentioned that these companies are hoping to become unicorns and getting huge funding from VCs, venture capitalists. So do you think the problem lies in the current VC culture as well?
So yeah, I mean, there definitely is a huge issue there. And I would say that what these companies have always had is dispensable cash at their disposal. And it's been funded by venture capitalist funds, both from India, mostly across the globe, etc. And I feel while the funding that was available to them or has always been available to them has of course helped them in rapidly scaling their operations, proliferating across tier 2, tier 3 cities, in some cases across the country. But at the same time, of course, it's given rise to these very real social and moral implications. And I think as someone who's investing in equity in a company, my only calculation and my only rationale in investing in a company is that a year or 2 years later, I will make more money. As an investor, if I'm investing 100 rupees in a company today, I am only hoping and betting that this same company a year later will raise more money at a higher valuation, so that my initial investment of 100 rupees is a year later probably $1,000. And this is of course a huge understatement, and the kind of money that they play with is it's beyond our understanding many times. So yeah, I don't think that when an investor is looking to invest in platforms like these, the question of their workers' well-being, the question of their workers' safety, etc. is, I don't know if it even makes the list. I don't know, and I don't think so, to be very honest. Because if it did, if investors demanded more accountability, not just financial but also social and moral from these companies, I'm sure a lot of these things would happen and play out a lot differently than the way that we've seen it play out over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So yeah, I'm pretty sure as much as the idea itself of a 10-minute delivery is to blame, I think VCs and investors and equity investors, etc., are equally at fault, if not more, to, not just give huge amounts of money to an idea like that, but also to encourage more sort of these players to come into the fray with the hope that even they'll raise money with a similar idea, etc. So yeah, I think VCs could have played this a little more efficiently in a way which is a little more socially and morally responsible. But of course, as the adage goes, like, they are in it for the money. I don't think they are really bothered about how an average Sumit Kumar who's been with Zomato for the last 4 years is faring. I don't think VCs are thinking about that.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, with help from Utsha Sermon, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.